What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back with a new thread video for you guys. It's been a little bit since I've done one of these, and this one came to mind courtesy of my Instagram page. I was just bored one day at work and decided, you know what, how about I do a Q&A with my followers? One of those guys being Boss Antelope 86, also co-host of the Shadow Cult podcast and regular on the Horseman podcast. He told me, why don't you do a video about like one album wonders or one and done albums in metal? And I thought, you know what? I'm shocked that idea has not been done before. Or maybe it has and I just don't know. But I wish I could take credit for starting this, but I really can't. So I'll link Boss Antelope 86 channel in the description box. He does videos on metal and sometimes sports and pro wrestling and stuff. Pretty cool kid. I call him a kid because he's much younger than me. So there you have it with that. But yeah, this is 10 one-and-done metal albums. Basically, what this is entailing, it's bands that have had only one album in their career and showcase 10 of the best. Now, of course, not a top 10. These are just 10 that I think are essential for me. Granted, there's 2 of them that I don't have in the collection, and principally because they're virtually impossible to find, so yeah, I have 8 that I have in the collection. 2 will be ones that I don't have. And actually, I might as well start with the 2 albums that I don't have. First, we have Disembowelment's Transcendence into the Peripheral. This was the lone studio album from this Australian-based death doom band that came out in 1993, I believe. And yeah, this was just some oppressive, dark, ambient death doom. Some people would even say it was like the big precursor to funeral doom, which I can see that argument because of like the really slow sections with the dark ambient moments. It kind of gave the vibe of a funeral dirge. But the thing that I think keeps it from being funeral doom is the more up-tempo sections, whether it be like mid-tempo chugs or flat-out grindcore riffs and blast beats. Almost like if you took a doom band and mixed it with Napalm Death a little bit. I mean, whenever it gets fast, it gets brutal and extreme. And then even in like the more mid-tempo doom marches or mid-tempo chugging or triplet chugs, it's so death doom or classic death metal. But when it gets into like the very, very slow, like ambient, dirgy sections that get drawn out quite a bit, it's quite something. It's very atmospheric, it's murky, it's filthy, and yeah, this is an album I need to get in the collection. However, like I said, it's virtually impossible to find unless it gets reissued here down the road, which I have a feeling it probably will. But yeah, Disembowelment, Transcendence into the Peripheral. And then the next one, probably if I had to choose my favorite out of all 10 of these, it would be this one, which is Dan Swano, Moon Tower. I mean, for those of you who have watched my channel for a long time should know that I am such a whore for Dan Swano because, I mean, the guy's just a musical mastermind. Like, everything he did, whether it be Edge of Sanity, Nightingale, Bloodbath, Witherscape, among so many other projects he's done, as well as production. This was his one solo album, came out in 1998, and basically this was right after Dan got kicked out of Edge of Sanity the year prior, and he wanted to kind of do like an up yours to Edge of Sanity and create what he felt was the ultimate death metal album. But then he was listening to Rush quite a bit during this time frame, and also hanging out with Michael Ockerfeld from Opeth, because they were already like super close friends, and basically they were jamming around a little bit and did a short-lived collaboration. I'm not going to try and pronounce the name because it's named after a city in Sweden, and I will butcher it, so I will spare you that. But they did a quick collaboration with like a song or two with lyrics all in Swedish, and it was also Dan decided to blah, 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 blah. I can't even fucking speak. Dan then decided to think, you know what? I wonder what would happen if I recorded a death metal album in 1972. That was kind of the mindset he was going for. So he basically kind of mixed his death metal influences with his prog influences and combined them together, and thus you had Moon Tower. And this album, yeah, it's very keyboard driven. After all, Dan showcases his keyboard and piano playing abilities perfectly on this album. But he does have some killer riffs and drum patterns on this album as well. Like, he's basically doing everything, production-wise, instrument-wise, vocal-wise. He's doing it all. And this album, like, from top to bottom, is perfection. From the beginning of Son of the Night all the way into the closing track, which I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but you got other great tracks on here too, like Uncreation, Add Reality, Encounter Parts. So many great songs. It's just top to bottom musical perfection. And I remembered talking to Dan about this, and yeah, it was an honor to get to talk to him 2 years ago, which I can't believe that happened. Still to this day, I can't believe it. But yeah, this album, it's a prog death metal masterpiece. Check it out. So now we're on to the 8 albums that I actually have physical copies for. So we're going to kick things off. Similar to Disembowelment, we have Winters Into Darkness. The lone studio album from this New York death doom band came out in 1990, and this was one of the pioneering albums for death doom. Like, when you think of Death Doom, this is probably one of the first albums most hardcore Death Doom fans would think of, because this was a big one. It was like an alternative to what Asphyx was doing and an alternative to the Peaceville 3 bands. After all this, you can definitely hear Celtic Frost worship on here, like primarily in the vocals, some of the riffs, and the murkiness behind it. Like, top to bottom, it is just a nasty, raw, gritty album from the beginning with Oppression, Freedom, Oppression, and then to Servants of the Warman, Godin, Eternal Frost, and the title track. Like, just every song. Kind of like I said, it's similar to Disembowelment, where you will get some, like, drawn out, long, slowed down sections with not a whole lot happening, but it's still very raw. And then, like, whenever it gets, like, more up-tempo, it's more groove forward rather than, like, blast beat oriented. And, like, from top to bottom, like, the vocal performance on this album is just nasty. Like I said, I think he was totally inspired by Tom G. Warrior when recording the vocals for this. But yeah, from beginning to end, this is one of the great Death Doom albums and bands. I wish they could get back together and make a follow-up, but I mean, what more do they have to prove? Alright, next up. Now, these next two, I can already foresee comments about these next two because of the controversy surrounding them, but if you were to separate the artist from the art, then people appreciate these next two albums. First off, we have Infestors, To the Depths in Degradation. The lone studio full-length from this Seattle-based death metal band. This came out in 1992, and, well, I'll just go ahead and talk about the whole controversy real quick. So, supposedly, there's this big controversy about the band where people thought they were, like, white supremacists or racists or whatever, and I read the lyrics. There is none of that. There is none of that in the lyrics. In fact, the lyrics are just nothing but the occult and gore, like, basically death metal lyrics. So, I don't know where that whole white supremacist thing came from. Like, I heard something like apparently there was a swastika on a picture they did with a pentagram on it, but I've heard over the years they've pretty much recanted that stance, so I don't know. But try not to talk even further about that. But the music on here, I've heard some people say that this is arguably among the most extreme sounding death metal albums of all time, not just in the production but in the performance. Like, excuse me, like the production itself, it is raw, it is gritty, it is filthy, but the music behind it, like, good lord, you want to talk about some of the most evil sounding vocals you will ever hear, like some of the lowest growls and the most demonic screams. Like, this album flat out at times gets black metal. Like, some people might look at this as kind of like a precursor to blackened death metal to some degree, because there are a few tremolos on here that are a little bit on the colder side as opposed to the more brutal side. But like tracks on here like the title track, Mephitic Exhumation, I think I said that right, Higher Art of Immutable Beauty, like, and just braided into Palsy, just nasty, evil, murky sounding songs. And of course with like some brutal lyrics with the occult and gore, basically trademark death metal lyrics. But yeah, production and the performance behind it, it's nasty. I'd check it out. If you, again, if the whole controversy is true, try to separate the artist from the art and appreciate the music for what it is. And I've heard people say this is like one of the best one-off death metal albums of all time. And then, in a similar vein, we have Disma, Towards the Megalith. And yeah, this is the lone album that came out from Disma back in, I think it was 2011, on Profound Lore Records. This is the reissue on Dementia Records, which is a Czech-based label. But yeah, this album, in a similar vein to Infestor, it is just raw, gritty, nasty death metal. But I would argue this is also more Death Doom oriented as well. It's like, you notice a trend, like Death Doom has a lot of these one-off albums, which is kind of strange, but kind of cool at the same time. And then real quick, the controversy with this is Craig Pilliard. I'm sure a lot of people know about it already, where it's like, I mean, I'm kind of neutral with the whole thing, because it's like, again, separate the artist from the art and appreciate the art for what it is musically. And top to bottom, this album, it's swampy, it's murky, it's gross. I mean, I listened to it, and holy crap, I couldn't believe how insane, like, the riff work was on here, and the vocals. I mean, all these tracks, particularly, like, Spectral Domination, Purulent Quest, Lost in the Burial Fog, and the title track. Just nasty death doom, death metal, whatever you want to call it, but it's pretty fucking awesome. I would love to hear a follow-up, but who knows if that's going to happen. I know Disma's still together, but who knows if it's going to happen. But yeah, Disma. Alright, now we can finally move away from controversial bands. So we have 5 more to go. Next up, we have probably one of the most essential ones, Repulsion Horrified. I mean, the lone studio album from this Flint, Michigan grindcore legendary band, pioneers of grind, some people even say. And yeah, this is the double disc reissue on Relapse when it originally came out on Necrosis Records, which, funny enough, the next album I'm going to talk about is kind of connected to this to some degree based on the label. But yeah, Horrified. I'd like to know who out there that's a fan of metal hasn't checked this album out yet. I mean, this is one of the essential extreme metal albums, and definitely one of the essential grindcore albums. I mean, right off the rip, from that groovy riff to the stench of burning death, all the way to the insanity that is the title track, it's just all-out fun. And yet the longest track of the album is just a little over 2 minutes with Black Breath, and that's like mostly punky D-beat oriented for the most part. But yeah, I like the punky thrash influence on here, like especially on tracks like Radiation Sickness, where that's so Slayer worship. All the way even to like songs like Bodily Dismemberment, Festering Boils with that grisly bass line at the beginning. I mean, just top to bottom, brilliant shit. And I love how there's a lot of bands named after tracks on this album, like Acid Bath, 6 Feet Under, The Lurking Fear, and Black Breath. I mean, those are pretty big ones right out of the gate right there. So, yeah, essential extreme metal, essential grindcore. Check it out if you haven't. I don't know why you're here if you haven't checked it out already. And then in a similar case to Repulsion in terms of the label, we have Carnage Dark Recollections, the lone album that came out in 1990 by this one-off project of Swedish death metal. This was the beginning of Michael Amat's journey into playing metal music, and this was essentially the best way to describe it, as Necrotic Nick said in the retro review that he and Shredlord did over at Thralls of Metal. It's essentially another Dismember demo or like another Carnage demo with Dismember throwing in their songs into the mix, or this was like another Dismember demo and Michael Amat's audition for Carcass, essentially, because this, just like Repulsion, was released on Necrosis Records, which was a label by Jeff Walker and Bill Steer, which was a subsidiary of Earache Records. And, well, this is some amazing, raw, Swedish death metal that has some touches of grind, some touches of thrash, some touches of doom. Like, top to bottom, every single song. My personal favorite being Deranged from Blood, especially that opening tremolo riff. It's like, am I listening to, like, the guitar version of the Phantasm score that was on Entombed's Left Hand Path? Because that's what it sounded like to me. And yeah, this is essentially like the ugly brother to Left Hand Path. So, yeah, I mean, other great tracks like Gentle Exhuming, Malignant Epitaph, Self-Dissection, Blasphemies of the Flesh, Torn Apart, Infestation of Evil. Awesome shit right here. And, yeah, it would have been interesting to hear this band do another album, but pretty much everybody went on to do their own thing. Michael joining Carcass, then eventually Arch Enemy. And the rest of the guys just continued on with Dismember. So, yeah, this is one of the best one-offs for sure right here. Alright, next up, and this is another personal favorite of mine, we have Newsted, Heavy Metal Music, the lone studio full-length from Jason Newsted's solo project. This came out in 2013. And yeah, this was pretty much, after Jason had left Voivod and he was just kind of doing his own thing, and I think also after he went into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with Metallica, it kind of lit a fire under his ass to be like, you know what? I think I still have more to give to metal music, and I'm going to have my own band and just go to town. And what's interesting, the lead guitarist or rhythm guitarist, I don't know what he played, Mike Mushak from Stained, was in this band and delivered some awesome riffs. I, again, can't remember if he did leads or he was just a rhythm player. But yeah, this is basically like everything Jason Newsted loves. Like, you have lots of classic heavy metal, lots of thrash on here, some groove-oriented stuff. But like, like the opening 3 tracks, arguably out of all these albums, one of the best 1, 2, 3 punches of any album. Heroic Dose was a fun opener. Soldier Head's a thrashy track. As the Crow Flies, kind of more of like that classic heavy metal element. And then even the 2 middle tracks, King of the Underdogs, that's like a groovy, catchy tune with a little bit of thrash. But the song Nocturnus, that is essentially Newsted at his doomiest. Like, that's so Black Sabbath worship, yet I can hear elements of bands like Cathedral and maybe even like St. Vitus. Like, this was just like everything Newsted loves about metal in one album. And even I will admit, even though I'm the world's biggest Metallica fan, I do perhaps like some songs on this album better than like Death Magnetic, even though I love Death Magnetic. But yeah, this is awesome stuff. And I know Newsted had this band back together recently, and hopefully we get a follow-up. If not, I'm happy with this album because this is some fun heavy metal. Alright, and then next up, the second to last one, this is kind of an essential one for obvious reasons. Control Denied's The Fragile Art of Existence. This was the lone album that came out in 1999 on Nuclear Blast, I believe, and this is the reissue on Relapse. But yeah, this was essentially the progressive metal side project for Chuck Schuldiner after doing Death with Sound of Perseverance. He was like, okay, I'm going to shelve Death for a little bit. We're going to go on to doing something that I've always wanted to do, and that's just more straight up metal or prog metal. And so he got Tim Amar, I think that's his name, to do the vocals, which were more high register, almost power metal-esque. But of course, the other members, Chuck on lead guitars and rhythm guitars, Shannon Hamm on lead and rhythm guitars, you have Steve DiGiorgio on bass and Richard Christie on drums. And musically, this album's just flying with some technical moments, lots of melody, and just overall beautiful send-off, perhaps an unintentional send-off for Chuck, as this was the final album he got to do before he wound up getting sick with the brain tumor that unfortunately took his life. Man, it still sucks he's no longer around, but at least he left off on a magical note with this album, and Death Sound of Perseverance as well. But yeah, top to bottom musically, just basically like everything Chuck loved about metal, all in the one package right here. And supposedly there was a lot of material for a second album, and it could be released. However, according to Jim Morris from Morrisound Studios, he said it's going to take a lot of work to make it sound good, and hopefully, if it ever does get released, hopefully people will receive it pretty well. But who knows if that's ever going to happen. But yeah, Control denied. And then finally, the final one, and this is probably, at least for death metal fans, this is an essential one, Demilich Nespi, the lone studio full-length from this insane Finnish death metal band, like technical death metal, avant-garde death metal, kind of hybrid. But yeah, this, I mean, you want to talk about musical insanity. Like, this is such a strange album, but I love it for that reason. Right off the rip with When the Sun Drank the Weight of Water, that opening track with those triplet chugs, and of course the demonic burping bullfrog vocals of Antti Bowman, and also Antti delivering some nasty riffs all over the map. And even tracks like the Echo Replacement, there's some like nasty tremolos on there that just feel disgusting. And then, of course, you know, the dissonance and the technicality on this album. I can definitely hear where, like, bands like Gorguts and Immolation, maybe even Ulcerate and other bands that incorporated dissonance and death metal could definitely pick up cues from this album. Granted, Immolation was already going before this album came out, but it was definitely more towards old school death metal, not as dissonant as they would become, and I could maybe see this album being one of the key reasons why they went down the more dissonant realm. But of course, like, the weirdness and the technicality can be matched by bands like Time Ghoul and Nocturnus to some degree, but it is very catchy too. Like, again, there's always these like odd yet catchy riffs going on all over the map, and just all these songs with some of the weirdest titles, like the 16th Six-Tooth Son of 14-4, Regional Dimensions, Still Unnamed, or Inherited Bowel Levitation Reduced Without Any Effort. This one's a mouthful. The planet that once used to absorb flesh in order to achieve divinity and immortality, suffocated to the flesh that is desired. Like, where do you come up with these titles, Antti, or the other guys in the band? Like, how? How do you do it? But yeah, this is an essential one-off death metal album. Definitely worth checking out. This is the version on Extreme Music, which, not the greatest remaster. I do have a second one. That was the 20th Adversary of Emptiness compilation. That sounds a lot better than this version, but it is cool to have both copies. But yeah, Demilich Nespi. If you haven't checked it out, go check it out. And that does it for this video on the 10 one-off metal albums, or one-and-done metal albums. Yeah, thank you, Boss Antelope, for giving me the inspiration to do this with that answer to a Q&A. Hopefully, I'll see more people do this one because I think this will be an interesting one because there are probably some one-off albums I don't know about. So, yeah, for those of you who are watching that have a YouTube channel, feel free to make a video response and don't forget to tag me in it so that way I know when to check it out. But if you don't have a YouTube channel, or if you don't make videos, I should say, leave a comment down below if some of your favorite one and done metal albums. And that's all for this time around. Thank you guys for watching. Like, comment, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Keep your horns high and your dreams wet.
Thank you for your patronage.